Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Thank you for joining me in another painting demo. So I'm still working on the lesson on painting water. I'm quite busy lately because of my day job, so sorry for the delay. It will be out next week. For the time being, I want to share the process of this painting. This is Washington, D.C., and the left image is actually captured from Google Street. I did a video on July 4th weekend on how to get the painting reference from Google Map and Google Street. So that's how this reference came about. So if you got a chance, if you haven't, go check out that video. I also did a value study of this specific painting, so I'm going to reference from that. So I'm just doing the drawing right now, trying to get the perspective and everything. I actually spent a little bit more time on doing the drawing for this painting than usual because there's so many man-made structures, buildings, cars, so I'm trying to get the perspective somewhat accurate. Now it's not going to be super accurate because I'm not using rulers and this is not an architectural drawing and painting, but still try to make it somewhat believable. I try to freehand my perspective, but sometimes when the paper is a little bit big, like this one, things can get off a little bit. So after I finish the painting, I did discover there's parts that looks a little bit weird, so I had to do a little bit of adjustment afterwards. So don't be like me, pay a little bit more attention on perspective and try to make a little bit more accurate drawing. Otherwise, if you finish the whole painting and some perspective is off and then you're not able to fix it, that will be a shame because you spend your time on it. This definitely happened to me before I finished the painting and I actually like it quite a lot. But afterwards, I realized that I made some perspective mistake and is out of the range of being believable for me. So I had to either redraw it or just throw that away. So that's quite a shame. So if you are doing a street scenery like these with a lot of man-made objects and buildings, structures and things like that, make sure you spend a little bit of time trying to make your perspective somewhat accurate. So here I started my first wash. I wet the sky randomly because I want some cloud like the one in the photo. Even though the lighting in the photo is actually an overcast day, but we do have some clouds parting and revealing the blue sky. So I paint some blue sky and when it hits the wet areas, it softens a little bit and I paint a few shadows in the cloud. Keep the sky relatively light though, because the focus should be the street and the buildings and the cars. So if you have too much contrast in the sky, then it's going to compete with the elements on the street. And I just continue to wash down. So here I'm around the horizon line. I start to slow down a little bit, leave out some highlights on the top of the car, the windshield and such. And I just continue down with clean water. And I darken it again so we have light sky, and when it reaches the horizon it's a little bit darker, but as it comes down it's dark again, so just to push the depths a little bit more. The most important thing though is to have a nice clean wash. So here I'm using a damp brush and pull out some directional lines. Now the first wash is dry. It's time for me to start painting the second wash. So I start off with the building, try to pre-mix some colors for the roof. So I'm trying my best to make the value as accurate as possible in my first try so I don't have to come back and glaze it again. So I make the roof just a little bit darker and then the wall of the clock tower. So I do leave out a little bit of highlight here and there, just trying to make it look a little bit more sophisticated, just a little hints of detail. And after that top part, I start to use a little bit bigger brush to continue this shape down. I really want to connect the shape together, and it's very important that I can do it in one go. So use a bigger brush can help. Do some dark detail wet onto wet. I don't need everything super sharp right now, so wet onto wet, dark detail. Make sure your mixture is a little bit drier so the shape doesn't bloom out too much. And I started to paint a little bit of green there just to connect the building and the tree shape. I will paint some darker shape later, but this is just a second wash. Let's make sure all the shapes are connected into the background as well. So the Capitol building is connected to the building on the right. So even though I do some wet onto wet, trying to give it a little bit details inside of the shape, but if you kind of squint your eyes, the shape is pretty much merged together. And it turns a little bit darker underneath because of the street level. There's a little bit more things there, but it's still one single shape. Now I have that shape connect into the car and the windshield. So anytime if you are able to find a shape to connect, then do that. The shape will look cleaner and it will look more atmospheric and just overall look more fluid. You want to have a big major shape, and everything else you paint should support that major shape. So if you can connect smaller shape into the big shape, then it will be very helpful and it will be a lot easier to read the whole painting. So when a viewer look at your painting, they will see the major shape, and as they look a little bit more carefully into the shape, they're going to see some minor shape like the car and the figure and all the little detail and nuances you put in. So always work on a bigger shape. Don't get carried away with little details. You don't want to paint a lot of small shapes. You want to paint a big shape with some small elements in it. So I add a figure in there just because I wanted to make it more relatable scale-wise, because we all know how big a person is. So putting a person in the painting, it will help the viewers understand the scale of the scenery. So finish that red taxi. So I realized that the taxis in the DC are mostly red, while a lot of different places like New York and Seattle, the taxi are mostly yellow. That's something interesting. Never visit DC before, and it's not a good time to do that right now because of the pandemic. So that's why I use Google to find the reference image. This is actually a commission that my friend wanted me to paint Washington DC for her, and she wants it to have rain, so that's why I do the reflection. So I pre-wet the paper underneath the car, and I start to drop in some paint just to make it have a smooth transition from the bottom of the car to the reflection. So the wheel is pretty much gone because of the connection between the bottom of the car to the reflection. But that's a good thing. You actually want to have some lost edges when you do watercolor, because that's what watercolor is meant to be. Some natural blending and fading. So wet onto wet is the best for watercolor when you are able to. Finishing up the figure, give the distant figure a turquoise umbrella. Just introduce a little bit of color in there. So as I am painting the car and the reflection, the buildings on the right is pretty much dry. So I start to mix some colors and paint the tree. Now we can define it a little bit better. When I use photo reference, I use it as just reference. So I don't try to copy everything one to one. And I encourage you to do the same. Use your creative license to change things to fit your own painting. The reference photo should work for your painting, not the other way around. So don't get so caught up by trying to make everything exactly the same as the photo. That's not the point of the photo. The photo is just there to give you some reference on the colors and the lighting and the perspective and all that, but you are doing your own painting. So be free and make your own decisions. So now I'm at pretty much the final stage, so I'm painting some dark details on the trees and the buildings, paint some structural lines to reinforce the perspective a little bit, add a little bit more detail in some windows. Keep it loose though. You see how I just blend all the windows into an abstract shape. So even though there's a little bit more details on the building, it still pretty much sit back. When you have a lot of windows, try not to paint repeating shapes because that will make it look boring and that's going to be too many details. So I'm adding the flags, the flag poles. The flag on the right, I decided to change it a little bit so it's coming out from the silhouette of the building instead of resting in the building shape itself, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Using some white gouache, paint the reflections of the headlight, the tail light there as well. Came out a little bit too dark, so I came back with thicker paint to make it a little bit brighter. So I haven't painted a rainy street scenery for quite a while. I used to do that, and I do believe a lot of people do that when they just got into watercolor, probably because the influence from Joseph Bookvich. So I try to stay away from that a little bit more, not because I don't like it anymore, just because I want to explore other possibilities. But the client actually want me to do a wet street scenery, so that's what I'm doing. It's still fun to revisit this subject, and it's fun to just kind of play with wet onto wet, let the water do its thing for the reflection and such. So now I'm re-wetting the sky a little bit because I do want a little bit more shadow on the clouds, so it just feels there's a little bit more volume. Still keep it light though, don't give it too much contrast. Here is the finished painting. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this short video. The next watercolor lesson will be here next week, so be sure to subscribe so you're not going to miss that one out. I'm Eric from Cafe Watercolor. See you next time.